try and move the chair out of the way. It's always good to have good. Sorry, I'm gonna let you down. Because like this screensaver over here,
Oh yeah,
why? Because it said it's never done this from before, so I didn't think about, looking at that.
this one, video dropped off. Oh, that's live.
It's like, okay, just doesn't show it on there.
It was there. Hey, did you want to swap?
No. Of course, watch it. Nothing will go wrong. Seriously.
Everything will go
wrong. No, that says that. I'll just put that out there.
Yeah.
This is something for failure.
Definitely, when everything was working so smoothly, it gets old with all these, that happen. This stuff is losing its settings. Why?
Hey Davey, with that men's thing on the 3rd, right? It's gonna be here at the building. There's gonna be
Did not check
barbecue
in on Facebook.
provided.
I saw it when I was logging out. Oh,
Ripper provided
still in person.
ringside, and then
Hard to believe.
are we
When I
going
asked my
to
parents
be
when they had
watching
theirs,
football?
did you ever think you'd be married 50 years? I'm like, I don't even think I ever thought about it. Like, it just happened. Yeah.
When we talked about
No, it's hard to imagine when you're young that you're ever going to be
he just
married.
said that we were going to do it this other way for that day. I don't know. Why not? Just log in.
Because I looked at that time, that is the Big Ten championship.
I can't see after I get in here.
Which we could put that game on the projector. I wanted to check with you.
Oh, her first birthday.
Is it the Chiefs?
Yeah, we're headed on.
Because we don't watch that garbage.
College stuff, so it's probably going to be Ohio State.
I gotta see Chris over here.
Yeah. You know, I'm just messing with you, right?
No, you're not.
No, actually, Lisa and
I can take it.
Chris, I really think there should be someone hiding in there. Ha!
And it does say on the
I was waiting
slide
for
that
it
the
in the last-
I
location.
gotta tell you something, Chris.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
It's an object.
I missed your call the other day. You know what happened? Well, when we have a little trailer there on Ridge Road.
All right, we're going to get started with our class this morning. We are talking gospel-centered marriage, and last week we got our first commitment of the 6 gospel commitments that every couple needs to make, and it was that we put into action a regular lifestyle of confession and forgiveness. And we talked about the blessing of confession, what it looks like, how it is done. We looked at the daily habits of a confession lifestyle in the context of a marriage. And this morning, I want to recount a story that I would say many of us probably already know, and that is the story of Jacob and Esau, or Esau and Jacob, depending on how you want to sort those. But if you remember, Jacob and Esau were born to Isaac and Rebekah in their old age, and Esau was his father's favorite, and Jacob was his mother's favorite. And one day, Esau is out working in the field, and he works himself ragged, so much so that when he comes back home, he is so hungry and famished that when he sees Jacob sitting there with some stew, he is willing to trade his birthright. Jacob, of course, being the kind of underhanded brother, is the one to initiate that of, oh, I see you're hungry, sell me your birthright. And there's a lot that goes into this story in different ways that you can take it, but just general facts related, that's what happened, right? Esau sells his birthright in order to eat some of that stew that Jacob was eating or was making. And then another day, as Isaac is getting older and wants to impart a blessing onto his favorite child, Esau, he tells Esau to go out and hunt for him, to prepare some wild game for them to eat, and then Isaac would then bestow his blessing upon Esau. Rebekah hears this and has a plan for her favorite child, Jacob, which he gets dressed in like heavy furs because Esau was a hairy man, and goes in, and because Isaac is blind at this point, Jacob takes advantage of that, and Isaac actually gives his blessing to Jacob, which, I mean, like, the family drama within this family alone, man, like, can you imagine some of this stuff going on in your own family, of like taking advantage of an old blind man? It doesn't sit well, right? And so when Esau comes back and realizes that he's got nothing at this point, he doesn't have a birthright, he doesn't have a blessing from his father, all of that Jacob has stolen from him. And so Jacob flees for his life, rightly so, right? Like, he needs to get out of there because of what he's imagining Esau might do. And Jacob then spends years and years away from his home and from his brother until, after getting swindled himself and getting married a couple times, he decides that he wants to come home. And I'm going to read Genesis 33, verses 1 through 9 here. And I want you to see how he is greeted back. As you can imagine, if this were a TV show, right? The previous episode would have ended with, "Let's go back home. I wonder if Esau's going to kill me. Dun, dun, dun." And then we have to wait a whole week, and then we come back, and this is what we see. In Genesis 33, verses 1 through 9, it says, "And Jacob lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, Esau was coming. Right? This is all right, he's coming to beat me up, pound my face in. And 400 men with him. So now Jacob might be thinking, he's just going to come kill my entire family. So he divided the children among Leah and Rachel and the 2 female servants. And he put the servants with their children in front, then Leah with her children, and Rachel and Joseph last of all. He himself went on before them, bowing himself to the ground 7 times until he came near to his brother. Jacob's taking on this posture of pleading, of begging, right? Like, don't kill my family, please. Verse 4, but Esau ran to meet him and embraced him and fell on his neck and kissed him, and they wept. And when Esau lifted up his eyes and saw the women and children, he said, "Who are these with you?" And Jacob said, "The children whom God has graciously given your servant." Then the servants drew near, they and their children, and bowed down. Leah likewise and her children drew near and bowed down. And last Joseph and Rachel drew near, and they bowed down. Esau said, "What do you mean by all this company that I met?" Jacob answered, "To find favor in the sight of my Lord." But Esau said, "I have enough, my brother. Keep what you have for yourself." I love this part of the story. You almost get kind of the prodigal son here returning vibes to this whole thing of Jacob coming back and thinking like Esau's going to kill me. But he's greeted with the exact opposite feeling. When you think about the story of Jacob and Esau and their reconciliation here, what lessons do we learn about marriage, do you think? Yeah, Phil? Don't have favorite kids. At least don't let them know. Exactly. Anything else? I mean, that's great advice. Great advice. It's not practical, but Phil?
Actually, that does cause great division. We kind of laugh about it, but it really, this would have never happened with Jacob and Esau had they not had favorite.
True.
children at home.
Yeah.
So that can cause some real chaos as the kids get older.
Absolutely. And beyond that, I mean, this isn't a parenting class, but parenting does, there is a lot of overlap into marriage, because if you're married and you have kids, then parenting becomes a very big issue, right? And that there are some kids that you might have more of a natural inclination towards, right? It's like I just get along better with this kid or that kid, but that doesn't mean you love the other ones any less. And it can also be dangerous in that close pairing of personalities might blind you to some things that child needs to work on, or what you need to help that child with. The story of Jacob and Esau, I think, illustrates perfectly illustrates what we're going to talk about today. And that is, healthy marriages are healthy, I forgot a Y in there, because the people in those marriages find joy in canceling debts. That's what we're going to talk about today as we round out this first commitment of putting into action a regular lifestyle of confession and forgiveness. I can't think of a more essential ingredient in marriage than forgiveness. Forgiveness is not always attractive. Forgiveness is difficult and costly. It will push you to the borders of your faith. It will tempt you to fear and doubt. But when forgiveness is granted and debts are canceled, the return is much greater than the cost. What do they say, or what do you think is the number one thing that couples fight over? Fight about? Money. That's it, right? Typically, and that this might not be representing your marriage, but on the whole, they say, the statistics tell us that the number one thing that couples argue about is finances. Now, what do you think is the number one reason why marriages fail? Like, why do people, what was it that finally, got them to, like, we need to separate?
They can't reconcile that problem. Their financial, their differences in how they run their finances. They can never come to an agreement on those things.
There's no reconciliation or agreement on whatever it is they're arguing about, finances or any other thing. What else? Yeah, Phil?
I would say holding a grudge.
Holding a grudge.
Now, you did this to me the last time.
Yeah, keeping a record of wrongs. Sure. Yeah, Krista?
I mean, selfishness.
Selfishness?
I mean,
Just generally?
for yourself, then you're not gonna get over the grudge.
Yeah. Putting yourself above your partner, right? That would be selfishness, and that can look like many different things in many ways. The top 4 reasons why marriages fail. Number 1 is lack of commitment. And this one was huge. They found it in it was something like 76% of divorce cases, they listed lack of commitment as the number 1. And number 2, infidelity. Reasons why marriages fail. Number 3, too much conflict. The couple just realizes that all we do is argue. All we do is have conflict. We can never get along. And then number 4, all the way down at number 4, is financial problems. And my inquisitive brain wants to know, well, if the number one thing that couples argue about is finances, but it's the number 4 reason why couples eventually separate is because of financial problems, I want to know why. See, they fight about money the most, but the thing that doomed the marriage was lack of commitment. And that tells me that there's something deeper going on here. The number one thing couples argue about is not typically what ends the marriage, and the lack of commitment. I mean, you think about what does that look like? How do you experience lack of commitment, Scott?
So the fact that they're arguing about money, it means at least they take the time to discuss it. It might be heated, but they're actually dealing with it. That if they, commitment, if they had none, they wouldn't even go there.
Well, that's true. Yeah.
That's probably what enters into your daily, life more often than
Yeah. A lack of commitment would be, it's almost like apathy, right? Of like, I just don't care, right? Whereas I heard this one time of when couples or when marriages are arguing a lot, like that's natural, right? We're going to argue, we're going to have disagreements about some things, but you should be worried when the arguing stops, because that means that the couple is given up. There's no commitment. It's apathetic towards each other. Rod?
Well, I was going to say I think the first one, lack of commitment, leads to the other ones. It leads to or fooling around or putting your work above your family life. That's all comes from lack of commitment.
And there's nothing that can doom a marriage more than feeling like you're playing second fiddle to something else, right? A lack of commitment is built over months and years in patterns of sin and failure that were not accompanied with humility, confession, and forgiveness, and a relationship can eventually turn into a daily war. And when that is the case, the daily carnage of the battle will overwhelm you.
I think the first three really have to do with your mindset when you first get in there. You know, you might think, oh, you know, I love this person and we're gonna, you know, be together forever, but really deep down, you know, there's that, they're thinking, I'm sure, you know, just their mindset of what they grew up and how they consider commitment is, you know, it's like, oh, we have this out, that, you know, if it doesn't work out, you know, it's no big deal. But, and so the people that do make it through to, you know, 50, 60 years, it has to do with their mindset when they first got married.
Are they committed? Yeah, but I mean, like, a marriage that's less than 50 or 60 years, commitment would probably be the word, right? It's like they are committed to this relationship. Absolutely, John.
That's a question that kind of rolled over my head. We say, you know, the number one reason is lack of commitment. Commitment to what? Commitment to the cartoon in my head of what this should look like? Commitment to this marriage? Or commitment to the person that's in this marriage with me? I think you split those hairs apart, and I think you can probably uncover the source of some of these issues. You know, if you're committed to this idea of what you think it ought to be, but you're not committed to the person that's in this with you,
Yeah.
you're probably in trouble until you know.
Yeah. Or not even like the commercialized or the Hollywood version of marriage, but even other people, like your friends or your community, whatever culture that you've built around yourself, their expectations of what the marriage should be, right? If that is, going back to Hannah's point, if that is what you come into the marriage thinking that it's going to be, and especially if you guys are on the same page, I mean, that's a recipe for a disaster, for sure. So,
Now I see commitment as a problem all across our society. There's no commitment to a job. You know, if something better comes on, you leave this one and go to that one. No commitment to a church, no commitment to God, no commitment to a spouse, no commitment to your children. So commitment is not just a problem in marriage, it's a problem in our society.
yeah.
And so it's up to us, I believe, to teach people and our children and whoever else we know to show them commitment, teach them commitment, and help them understand there's benefits in long term.
Yeah.
Years ago, our son was working for EchoStar, and another job came up, and he'd been there about 5 years. I said, son, you need to think about this. You know, long time commitment to a job can work out to the best. Well, Dad, that's just your way of looking at it. You've been there for 30 years, you know. But he stayed, and so because of that, then he's been offered other positions that are a lot greater because of that. People don't realize that companies, churches, women, men, everyone's looking for people that are committed to whatever part is in your life.
Yeah. And what better way to teach our kids commitment than with our marriages, through thick and thin.
It's my contention that selfishness is the core problem of all of this. If people are committed, they're committed to themselves. And if they aren't, as Phil said, if you're not raised to gradually go from being selfish to selfless, our society, in our history, we were more aimed at, because of our freedom, we were more aimed at raising children that understood that you had a certain, because of your freedom, you had a certain commitment to your society. You had to learn to be selfless and follow the laws and things like that. We're not doing that as much. And as like was already said, we're not raising our children to understand what selfishness and selflessness are, and how they
about this a different way. In Galatians 6, verse 7, it says this, "Do not be deceived, God is not mocked. For whatever one sows, that will he also reap." There is this general teaching throughout the Bible of that what you plant, you will harvest. All right? Which is not just a spiritual thing, but a worldly thing, a physical thing too. That what you plant, you will harvest. And in marriage, every day you harvest what you previously planted, and every day you plant something that will eventually be harvested. And couples who are caught in a cycle of not forgiving each other will be harvesting what they had sown over years. When you are sowing unforgiveness, there are several marriage damaging stages, and most marriages caught in this cycle follow the same path. So we are about to embark into the harvest of unforgiveness in stages. This is not pretty, but it's true. It begins with immaturity and failure. What age were you when you first got married? Just shout out your ages. Okay, you're all babies. Just so immature. Why would you decide to do that? Alicia and I were. I was 19 and she was 18, and we knew everything. Okay, we had it all figured out. But you get into marriage, and you realize, or at least now looking back, I can think and look at how immature we really were. Not only are people who get married flawed, they also enter into their marriages quite young, quite naive, and immature. In the early years of marriage, they do dumb, selfish, and sinful things. And when this happens, it gives way to accusation, blame, judgment, and punishment rather than to confess and forgive. And each selfish act followed by a bitter response damages the affection they have for one another and the unity they are meant to enjoy. Followed quickly by falling into comfortable patterns. And this is not just for marriage, this is how just we work as human beings. We typically fall into comfortable patterns, the path of least resistance, right? And so since confession and forgiveness is hard work, it is much easier to satisfy lower urges. It's easier to just walk away and compile a list of the other's wrongs, to yell in anger, and to level a threat. While these patterns may be comfortable, they are relationally destructive. That's doing the easy thing. Then we establish defenses. Instead of growing in areas of honesty and forgiveness, many couples learn early to build up walls of defense against each other. Couples soon learn that the best defense is a good offense, so they reach into that list that they have compiled and are reminded of how imperfect the other person is. Therefore, they are the problem and not yourself. Number 4 is nurturing dislike. Because they only meditate on the wrongs, their perspective becomes increasingly negative towards the other. So instead of nipping dislike in the bud, they allow it to grow and flourish. And at this point, the couple may even say things like, "I don't even like the other person." You eventually become overwhelmed. At some point, living with someone you don't like very much and feeling the daily need to defend yourself becomes exhausting and discouraging. It kills the love. Absolutely, Margaret. The same offenses are taken and the same accusations are leveled over and over again. The same debate over who is the harder one to live with happens again and again. And the couple then, instead of, which was once a household of love and embracing one another, becomes walking on eggshells around the other. You begin to envy other couples. You start looking around and cruising the neighborhood, looking at couples that seem to have everything that you don't. It's tempting to wonder what it would be like to be married to that other woman or that other man. And you can even be tempted to doubt God's love and wisdom in this situation, and you play the comparison game and even use the other couples that you see, the other couples' relationships, as ammunition to hurl at your spouse. And finally, the fantasies escape. It all leads here. You are angry and hurt and overwhelmed. You don't like each other very much, and you don't look forward to spending time with each other. You can't imagine your spouse is really ever going to change, and it all seems impossible. So you start to fantasize about escape. And the leap from here to divorce seems closer than you ever thought. Now, this is a bleak representation of marriage. But it's true. If I would hope that you aren't caught in these stages, but if you are, if there's any way that I can help, I would love to. But this is how it happens. This is, for people thinking like divorce is, we all say like divorce is never an option. But by the time you get through all of these stages, down to number 7, that thought of, we're never going to get divorced is so far from your mind that it looks like an out. You fall into a pattern. Things are almost never about, one huge argument or one huge event. You fall into a pattern and things slowly get worse and you become numb. The answer to all of this is what we're talking about, because this is the harvest of unforgiveness. And so the rational thought is, well, you just need to forgive. But why don't they forgive? Why don't people just forgive one another? What's stopping them? Trust? Pride? What was that over here? Pride? You said pride? I agree with all of that.
Chris, I've heard people say that they're too hurt to forgive.
Too hurt? Absolutely.
Does that make it okay?
I'll get to that in a second.
Okay.
They haven't apologized yet, so why should I forgive them?
Oh, yeah, they haven't apologized. So until they apologize, I'm going to withhold my forgiveness. That definitely stops.
I kind of struggle with what's unforgivable. Like, what's too far? Where's that line that we draw it? And if we forgave once, does that give permission to do it again and again and again?
Repeat offenses.
Right. And so we've been forgiving for so many years, and it happens and continues to happen. These offenses.
When we think about canceling a debt, Phil has something to say.
I was just gonna address that comment a little bit. When we look at our own lives and our relationship with God, how many times have we asked forgiveness for the same thing? Because typically we have those things that we need to overcome, and sometimes we may not ever overcome them. We just keep going to God and say, God, forgive me for this. I know I've been here before. So when we look at that idea with our relationship with our spouse, they did the same thing yesterday, and they did the same thing 2 weeks ago, and maybe even a month ago, but it's still, they're worthy of our forgiveness.
I'm going to cover that in a second. Phil, and this idea of like, how do we do that? Like, how do we forgive each other? What does it look like? But I want us to first consider like what is stopping people from forgiveness? Like if you are caught in this cycle, these stages, right? This is bad. Why don't they just forgive? Well, number one, debt is power. Like that you need to understand that. That people caught in those stages, they can view whether they do it consciously or subconsciously. They're viewing debt as power. There is a power in having something to hold over another's head. There is power in using a person's weakness and failure against him or her, which is all things that we shouldn't do. We realize that. But to answer the question, that could be a reason. Debt is also identity. Holding on to your spouse's sin or their weakness, their failure, makes us feel superior to our spouse. It allows us to believe that we are more righteous and more mature than our spouse. And instead of getting our identity from God, we get it by playing the comparison game with our spouse. Debt is also entitlement. Because all of our spouse's wrongs are against us, then he or she owes us. And we might hear things like, after all I have had to endure in this relationship with you, don't I deserve fill in the blank? But debt is also weaponry. All our spouse's sins and failures we carry around with us like a loaded gun. And when they make us angry, we pull it out, we take aim, and then we pull the trigger. So why not just forgive? Here's some reasons. Scott, you had your hand up.
I was going to say, most people who don't forgive haven't been taught that concept. They weren't raised with that.
Perhaps.
To understand it.
Perhaps, yeah. But living a lifestyle of forgiveness is not just the better way, it's the only way. It's the only way to live in an intimate, long-term relationship with another person. It's the only way to negotiate through the weakness and failure that will daily mark your marriage. It's the only way to deal with hurt and disappointment. It's the only way to have hope and confidence restored. It's the only way to protect your love and reinforce the unity that you have built. It's the only way to not be kidnapped by the past. And it's the only way to give your marriage the blessing of fresh starts and new beginnings. But the question is, what is forgiveness? What actually is it? And I believe that there is a vertical and horizontal aspect to this. The vertical goes like this. It begins by giving the offense to the Lord. The idea, like, let go and let God, right? That's what they say. But what does that mean? This does not mean that you act as if something wrong is right. It means that you do not carry the wrong with you. It's letting it go, bitterness. And that you do not treat the other in light of that wrong, because that would be judgment. You entrust yourself to God's mercy and justice. In Romans 12, verses 19 through 21, it says, "Beloved, never avenge yourselves, but leave it to the wrath of God. For it is written, 'Vengeance is mine, I will repay,' says the Lord. To the contrary, if your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he is thirsty, give him something to drink. For by doing so, you will heap burning coals on his head. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good." And typically, when we read through this, when we see the term enemy, I would hope at least the last thing on your mind is that your spouse is that enemy. But at times in your marriage, especially if you are caught in those stages of harvesting that unforgiveness, it's very easy to start looking at your spouse as if they were the enemy. And when God says, or when Paul writes here, leave it to the wrath of God, it's the the vertical aspect of forgiveness is the art of letting things go, of letting God do his part in repaying that vengeance. But there's also a horizontal aspect to it, and the horizontal aspect of forgiveness is relational. It requires the right attitude of grace and the right goal of reconciliation. But here's the catch. You cannot relationally forgive someone who has not asked for it. What is the biblical model to do when you are wronged? What does the Bible tell us to do? If someone has wronged you, what are you supposed to do? I don't have supersonic here. I can't hear that.
Go to them.
Go to that person. Right? Absolutely. Matthew 18, verse 15, it says, if your brother sins against you, go and tell him his fault between you and him alone. If he listens to you, you have gained your brother. That's how it's supposed to work, right? If someone wrongs you, you go to that person. You don't go to Facebook and flame them. You don't go gossip about them. You go to that person. If your spouse has wronged you, it is your Christian duty to go to them and tell them, you have wronged me. You have sinned against me. If you believe you have wronged your spouse, it is also your duty to go and confess that and seek their forgiveness. But here's something that, like, typically this is not how it works, right? Because when we think about our marriages, oftentimes our goal is not, something that is flourishing. It's not in, the gospel-centered marriage. It's in the context of peace. We just want to keep the peace. I don't want to argue. I don't want to fight anymore. And if I start this conversation, it's going to lead to a fight. Even though I'm asking forgiveness, or like I'm just spouting facts here, like this is what happened, and I found an offense to that, and are you sorry? I'd love to be able to forgive you, but do you even apologize for that? And so we kind of just skip over this whole thing and just kind of grin and bear it, because we want to be happy. But here's what we need to know. Husbands, it is not spiritually helpful for you or loving towards your wife to act as though what is not okay is okay. And wives, it is not good for you or kind to your husband to act as if a sin committed against you is all right. The Bible nowhere calls for us to just grin and bear it for the sake of relationship. But you might ask, isn't it easier just to move on? Easier, yes. But you remember that tidal wave that we talked about last week? Of how there's this frozen tidal wave that's just sitting there, right? And that tidal wave represents our past, all of our arguments, all of our past failures and disagreements. All of these things that are just left unresolved are sitting there. And so when we have a fight about peppering the corn or what have you, that tidal wave comes crashing down. And by not actually having the conversation about the fact that you wronged me, or I feel unheard, or I don't think, you did this to me because for the sake of the marriage you don't want to have the fight, you're just heaping more stuff on top of that tidal wave. And at some point, it will come crashing down. Every unresolved issue, every fight, every disagreement, every disappointment, unmet expectation, it all adds to the tidal wave. And so, yes, we need to be forgiving people, right? But the whole commitment here, right, of together, we will put into action a regular lifestyle of confession and forgiveness. This is why it's commitment number one and why it's so important. Because in order for that to work in a relationship, both people need to be committed to it. Like, of saying to the other, if I do something wrong, I want you to call me on it because I want to be a better husband and I don't want to hurt you, right? And if I do something wrong, I am committed that even if you don't see it, that I want to come and ask for forgiveness and I want to apologize for that. I want to confess those things. And having the trust and love between the two, that when that conversation happens, it's met with patience and love in forgiveness. Now I realize that that does not represent every marriage, because we are flawed and we are selfish at times and sinful. But this should be the goal that we set out to achieve. And there are multiple different hypotheticals that we could get into of, what happens. Peter asked, right? Like, how many times should I forgive my brother when he sins against me? And Jesus responds, 7 times 70, right? Which is not a literal number, but more of an idea of like continuing to forgive. But also, when marriage is considered, there's some things that perhaps you didn't plan for. Really, nobody does. What happens when my husband or wife is being abusive towards me, or that for safety reasons, or that they're not willing to do this, right? They're not willing to make this commitment. That's when things get a lot messy. And that is why, this makes total sense, why the number one reason why people seek divorce is because it's a lack of commitment. And this takes commitment in order to do. It takes humility, compassion, and trust. And so as much as you might be hearing all of this today and thinking, man, I sure hope my husband or wife is taking notes on this one. There are some things that we can do individually to help our spouse be more committed to this, by ourselves being more humble, ourselves having more compassion, ourselves being more trustworthy and having self-control. Here are the daily habits of a confession lifestyle. Once again, if you didn't take a picture of them last week, these are things that I, at least should have some type of discussion in your marriage, and that, like, hey, can we commit to doing something like this, or a few of these, or one of them? Scott, what were you going to say?
I think that, it is scriptural that the husband is the spiritual leader of the family. And as such, we need to grow into that role. It's not easy to start, being right on top of that, but that, we should strive to kind of be the initiator for this, or at least the leader in this process.
I agree with that as a man, but again, that might not be everyone's situation.
It's not an easy thing to do, but we'll go.
All right, that is our class this morning. I'm going to close us out with a prayer, and then we'll be dismissed from our class. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you so much for today in this class and this time that we can get together and talk about marriage. It's sometimes it can be kind of a delicate subject, and that people have been hurt, and there are marriages failing every day. God, help us to not be discouraged by that. Help us to continue to reach for the ideal, and to continue to make commitments to one another, and try to live up to those commitments. God, forgiveness is so tough. It is one of the most difficult things that we can do, and we need your help in order to be more forgiving, but also in crushing our pride and lowering ourselves and being that humble person that would go seek forgiveness and confess when we are the ones who have transgressed the other. God, help us in our marriages. Help us to be more humble, more patient, more self-controlled. And help us to reach out for help to you and one another when we need it. God, please be with us now as we enter into this time of worship. Help us to worship you in spirit and in truth. And we love you so very much. It's in your Son's name that I pray. Amen.